The great chamber of the Galactic Council stretched upward into darkness, its walls made of living crystal that pulsed with soft light. 12 ancient species had built this place 10,000 years ago, and in all that time, they had never invited a human to speak. Until today, Ambassador Linda Morrison walked across the polished floor, her footsteps echoing in the vast silence. She was 53 years old, with gray streaks in her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. Behind her walked Commander Nathan Cole, a tall man with broad shoulders and a face that had seen too many battles. He wore his dress uniform, but underneath it were scars from Vectory plasma burns. The council members watched from their elevated platforms, each species in its designated place. The Altheans floated in columns of golden light, their bodies shifting between solid and transparent. The Marathi sat in pools of warm water, their scaled faces unreadable. The Khazari perched on crystal branches, their 4 wings folded tight against bodies covered in iridescent feathers. Linda had studied each species for years. She knew their histories, their customs, their strengths and weaknesses. She also knew they all shared one thing in common. They thought humanity was a joke. "Honored members of the council," Linda began, her voice steady despite the weight of 1 billion human souls depending on her words. "I come before you with a warning that cannot wait." The Althean High Speaker, a being named Valith, who claimed to be 4,000 years old, made a sound that might have been amusement. The human speaks of urgency. How charming. Your species has been traveling between stars for barely 3 centuries. We have been here since before your ancestors learned to make fire. Linda did not flinch. She had expected this. The Vectory Dominion is preparing for war, she said. Not a border dispute. Not a trade conflict. Total war. The kind that ends with entire species in chains or graves. Silence fell across the chamber. The Khazari delegate ruffled her feathers nervously. The Marathi ambassador sank deeper into his pool. "We have evidence," Linda continued. She activated her datapad and holographic images appeared in the center of the chamber. "These are intercepted communications from Vectory Military Command. These are satellite images of shipyards in the Outer Rim, producing vessels that have no civilian purpose. These are troop movements along the borders of Althean space." Nathan stepped forward. "I've fought the Vectory," he said, his voice rough. 6 years ago, they raided our colony on Proxima 7, killed 200 civilians. The council called it a misunderstanding. He pulled open his collar, revealing a scar that ran from his jaw to his chest. "This is what their misunderstanding looks like." Velit's form flickered with what might have been irritation. "Commander, we understand that humans have a violent history. Your species spent most of its existence killing each other. Perhaps you see enemies where there are none, because conflict is all you know." Linda felt Nathan tense beside her, but she placed a hand on his arm. "High Speaker, I am not here to argue about human nature. I am here to tell you that the Vectory do not want peace. They want conquest. And they believe the Council is too weak and too comfortable to stop them." "The Vectory had been our neighbors for millennia," said the Marathi ambassador, his voice bubbling through the water. "We have treaties. We have trade agreements. War would be illogical for them." "War is never logical," Linda replied. "But the Vectory do not think like you. They are predators. They have been waiting, watching, building their strength while you convinced yourselves that the galaxy had moved beyond violence." She brought up another image, a massive structure in deep space, half hidden by a dust cloud. "This is a weapon. We do not know exactly what it does, but our scientists believe it is capable of destroying entire planets. The Vectory have been building it for decades." The chamber erupted in noise. The Khazari shrieked. The Marathi splashed in agitation. Even the Altheans flickered rapidly, their forms destabilizing. But Valith raised a tendril of light, and silence returned. "Ambassador Morrison," he said slowly, "you ask us to believe that a species we have known for 10,000 years is secretly planning to destroy us? Based on the word of a species that was still burning witches 500 years ago?" Linda felt her patience wearing thin, but she kept her voice calm. "I ask you to investigate. Send your own ships to verify what I have shown you. If I am wrong, you lose nothing. If I am right and you do nothing, you lose everything." The council members exchanged glances, communicating in ways humans could not perceive. After what felt like an eternity, Valeth spoke again. "We will take your concerns under advisement." Linda knew what that meant. It meant they would do nothing. "High Speaker," she said, "one last time humanity has a saying. Those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. We have seen what happens when warnings are ignored. We watched our own world nearly destroy itself because leaders refused to believe that danger was real until it was too late." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every species she could identify. "We are offering you our help, our intelligence, our soldiers if it comes to that. All we ask is that you listen." Velith's form solidified into something that almost resembled a human smile, but without any warmth. "Humanity's offer is noted, but the Galactic Council has maintained peace for longer than your species has existed. We do not need advice from children." The vote was unanimous. Earth's warning was officially dismissed. Nathan and Linda walked out of the chamber in silence. Outside, the sky of the Council homeworld was a deep purple, filled with ships from 100 different species going about their business as if nothing was wrong. "What do we do now?" Nathan asked. Linda watched a Vec-3 diplomatic vessel glide overhead, its black hull absorbing the light. "We go home. We tell Earth to prepare, and we pray that we are wrong about what is coming." She was not wrong. 6 months later, the Vec-3 Dominion launched its attack. They struck 17 star systems in the same hour, using weapons the Council had not believed existed. The Althean homeworld of Ethon fell in 3 days. The Marathi lost their entire fleet without firing a single shot. The Kasari were scattered into refugee camps across the sector and across the galaxy. The Council members who had laughed at humanity's warning found themselves facing extinction. On Earth, Linda Morrison watched the reports coming in from the front lines. Cities burning. Species surrendering. Fleets destroyed before they could even mobilize. "They did not listen," she said quietly. Nathan stood beside her, already in his combat armor. Ships were launching from every human colony, heading toward the fire. "No," he agreed. "But we did." Placed his helmet on his head and walked toward the transport that would carry him to war. Linda stayed at her desk, preparing the message she would soon deliver to the Council again. This time, she knew they would listen. Because this time, humanity was their only hope. The war had begun, and humanity was ready. The Althean flagship burned in the darkness of space, its beautiful crystalline hull cracking apart like glass dropped on stone. Admiral Patricia Dunn watched from the bridge of the Earth battleship Resolute, her hands gripping the command rail until her knuckles turned white. Patricia was 61 years old. She had joined the United Earth Defense Force when she was 18, served in every major conflict humanity had fought since then, and had buried more friends than she cared to count. But she had never seen anything like this. The Vec-3 fleet moved through the Althean formation like wolves through sheep. Their ships were ugly things, all sharp angles and dark metal, built for one purpose only. The Althean vessels tried to flee, tried to regroup, tried to do anything except what they needed to do, which was fight.
"Admiral,
the Althean flagship is requesting assistance," said Lieutenant Kevin Grant from the communications station. He was young, barely 25, and his face was pale. "They say they have the High Council members aboard. If that ship goes down, the entire Althean government dies." Patricia studied the tactical display. The flagship was surrounded by 6 Vec-3 destroyers. To reach it, she would have to punch through the enemy line with everything she had. She would lose ships. Good ships with good people aboard. The same Altheans who had laughed at humanity 6 months ago. The same ones who had called them children. "All ships," Patricia said into her command channel. "This is Admiral Dunn. We are moving to support the Althean flagship. Formation Delta 7. Weapons free." Her executive officer, Commander Gregory Shaw, looked at her with something like surprise. "Admiral, that will cost us at least 4 destroyers. Maybe more." I know what it will cost, Greg. Why? They did not help us when the Vectri raided our colonies. They did not even believe us when we warned them. Patricia turned to face him. Her eyes were hard, but not angry. Because we are not them. We do not leave people to die because they made us angry. We do not let innocent civilians burn because their leaders were fools. That is not who we are. She turned back to the viewport as her fleet began to move. All ships engage. The battle was brutal. Human vessels, smaller and less elegant than the Althean ships, but built for war rather than show, tore into the Vectri formation. Plasma fire lit up the void. Ships exploded on both sides. But inch by inch, the Resolute pushed through. Lieutenant Kevin Grant called out, "Damage reports." The destroyer Vigilant was gone. The cruiser Endurance was venting atmosphere. The carrier Bold Response had lost its port flight deck, but they kept moving. Patricia watched a Vectri destroyer turn toward her ship. Its weapons charging. She did not flinch. All forward batteries target that vessel. Fire. The Resolute shuddered as it unleashed everything it had. The Vectri ship broke apart in a bloom of orange fire. When it was over, 12 human ships had been destroyed. But the Althean flagship still existed, and the High Council members were alive. Valeth's voice came through the communication system, weak and shaken. "Admiral Dunn, the Althean people, thank you for your assistance. We did not expect humans to come to our aid," Patricia replied without emotion. "We warned you, High Speaker. You chose not to listen. But we do not abandon allies, even ones who have not been kind to us. Remember that." She cut the channel before Valeth could respond. On the planet Cirith Prime, the war looked very different. There were no great fleets here, no gleaming ships fighting in the void. Here there was only fire and blood and the screams of the innocent. Marine. Sergeant Danny Reeves crouched behind the ruins of what had once been a school. His squad was down to 8 soldiers from an original 20. They had been fighting for 3 days without sleep, without reinforcement, without any hope of victory. Their job was simple: hold the line until the evacuation. Ships could get the civilians out. Danny was 34 years old. He had grown up in a small town in Kansas, joined the Marines because he wanted to see the galaxy, and ended up here, fighting and dying for people he had never met. The Marathi were peaceful people. They had never developed weapons because they had never needed them. Their society was built around art, music, and the cultivation of the beautiful crystal gardens that covered their world. When the Vectri came, they had no way to defend themselves. "Sergeant, enemy armor approaching from the east," reported Corporal Maria Santos, her voice tight. She was 28, originally from Texas, and the best shot in the squad. Danny peered around the corner. 3 Vectri tanks were rolling down the main street, their weapons sweeping left and right, destroying everything in their path. "Fall back to the secondary position," Danny ordered. "Santos, set up on that rooftop. Slow them down." "How am I supposed to slow down tanks?" "Get creative." They ran. Behind them, the Marathi civilians huddled in the underground shelters Danny's squad had helped them build. Thousands of them, mostly children and elderly, waiting for evacuation ships that might never come. A Marathi elder named Tessari had stayed above ground to help coordinate with the human soldiers. He was ancient by his species standards. His scales faded to pale silver, but his eyes were sharp. "Why do you fight for us?" Tessari asked Danny as they took cover in a collapsed building. "Your people warned the council. We did not listen. You have every reason to leave us to our fate." Danny checked his rifle's charge. "Where I come from, we have a saying. You do not kick a man when he is down. You help him up, even if he was wrong. Especially if he was wrong, because being right is not the same as being good." The tanks were getting closer. Danny could feel the ground shaking. "When this is over," Danny said, "maybe your people will remember that humans stood with you when no one else would. Maybe next time you will listen when we tell you something is coming." Tessari nodded slowly. "If we survive, Sergeant, I will make sure my people never forget." "Good." Danny raised his rifle. "Now get to the shelter. We will hold them here." The battle lasted for more hours. Danny's squad was reduced to 3 soldiers by the end. Maria Santos took out 2 tanks with improvised explosives before a sniper round caught her in the shoulder. Danny himself was wounded twice but refused to stop fighting when the evacuation ships finally arrived. Guided by a human carrier that had broken through the Vecthory blockade, Danny's squad had held the line long, enough to save 11,000 civilians. Danny watched the ships lift off from the landing zone, their hulls packed with Marathi refugees. Tessari was among them, his silver scales catching the light of the burning city. "Sergeant," said Private Kyle Patterson, the youngest member of the squad at only 20 years old, "do you think we made a difference?" Danny looked at the destruction around them. The crystal gardens were ash. The beautiful towers were rubble. A world of peace and art had been turned into a graveyard, but 11,000 people would live because humans had stood in the fire. "Yeah, kid," Danny said quietly. "We made a difference." Across the galaxy, the Galactic Council reconvened in emergency session. Their beautiful chamber was now scarred by weapons fire, half its crystal walls shattered. Many seats were empty, their occupants dead or fled. Ambassador Linda Morrison stood before them once again. This time no one laughed. "We told you," she said simply. "Now let us discuss how we are going to fix this." The war was far from over. But for the first time, the galaxy began to understand what humanity truly was. Not children. Not primitives. Not a joke. They were the ones who stood when everyone else ran. And they were just getting started. The fortress world of New Geneva had been built 200 years ago as humanity's final line of defense against any threat from the stars. Now it served as the command center for the largest military operation in galactic history. General Marcus Webb stood at the center of the unified command room, surrounded by holographic displays showing the positions of fleets across 300 star systems. He was 64 years old, a career soldier who had started as a private and worked his way up through every rank. His hair was white, his face was lined with decades of worry and hard decisions, and his eyes missed nothing around him. Officers from 12 different species worked at stations originally designed for human hands. Althean technicians analyzed sensor data. Marathi communications specialists coordinated fleet movements. Khazari pilots trained on human fighter craft in simulators along the walls. It was chaos. Beautiful, productive chaos. A Khazari commander named Sareth approached Marcus, her feathers rippling with agitation. "General, my pilots are struggling with the human combat doctrine. Our training emphasizes individual skill and grace. Your tactics require coordination and sacrifice." Marcus nodded. "In our military history, we learned that war is not about glory or personal honor. It is about winning. And winning means working together, protecting each other, and being willing to die for the soldier beside you." Sarath tilted her head. "Your species has been fighting wars for thousands of years, against each other. Yes. And you see this as an advantage?" Marcus smiled grimly. "We are not proud of it, but we learned lessons in those wars that the Vecthory never had to learn. We know what total war looks like. We know what it takes to survive it." He pointed at the tactical display. "The Vecthory think they are predators. They think they are the strongest, the most ruthless. They have never faced an enemy that was willing to match them blow for blow, and humans are willing. Commander, we invented nuclear weapons and used them on ourselves. We developed chemical warfare, biological weapons, and machines designed for nothing but killing. We have done terrible things in our history." He met her eyes. "But that means we also know how to fight terrible enemies. And right now, that knowledge is the only thing standing between the galaxy and extinction." Captain Lisa Brennan led the strike force that changed the course of the war. Her squadron was small, just 15 ships crewed by volunteers who understood they were probably flying to their deaths. They jumped behind enemy lines, deeper into Vecthory territory than any Allied vessel had ever gone. Their target was a supply depot that fed 3 Vecthory invasion fleets. Without those supplies, the enemy's advance would slow. Without fuel and ammunition, even the strongest fleet becomes useless. Lisa was 42 years old, former test pilot, who had set 3 speed records before the war. She had volunteered for this mission because she knew that skill alone would not be enough. Only luck and raw human stubbornness could see them through. All ships. This is Brennan, she broadcast on the encrypted channel. We are about to do something very stupid. The Vectri do not think anyone would be crazy enough to attack their supply lines this deep in their own space. We are about to prove them wrong. Her second-in-command, Lieutenant Commander Howard Park, responded from the ship beside hers. Captain, they have orbital defense platforms around that depot. Heavy ones, I know. At least 40 warships in the system. I know that too. Any advice for how we survive this? Lisa smiled. Do not die. That is an order. The attack was over in 20 minutes. Lisa's squadron dropped out of jump space directly above the depot, launched every missile they carried, and then scattered before the enemy could respond. The depot exploded in a fireball that could be seen from 3 planets away. 8 ships made it out. 7 did not. Lisa sent her report to General Webb from the safety of Allied space. The response came back quickly. Mission successful. 3 Vectri fleets were now stranded without supplies. The invasion of the Khazari homeworld had been delayed by at least 2 months, but Lisa did not celebrate. She looked at the empty spaces in her formation where friends had been, and she wondered how many more empty spaces there would be before this war ended. On occupied worlds across the galaxy, resistance movements were rising, and wherever humans had left behind advisors, those movements were becoming deadly. Sergeant Maria Santos had recovered from her wounds on Saruth Prime. Now she served on Gathax for a world the Vectri had conquered 3 months ago. Her mission was to train the local population to fight back. The Gathaxians were tall, 4-armed beings who had been engineers and scientists before the invasion. They had never held weapons in their lives. The Vectri are stronger than you, Maria told her students, a group of 50 Gathaxians gathered in a hidden cave system. They are better armed. They have ships in orbit that can destroy this entire continent if they want to. So how do you fight an enemy like that? A young Gathaxian named Prothel raised one of his hands. We cannot. It is impossible, Maria smiled. That is exactly what they want you to think. But here's the truth. You do not have to beat them in a straight fight. You just have to make them bleed. Every day, every hour, every minute. You make their lives difficult. You destroy their supplies. You sabotage their equipment. You make them afraid to sleep. She held up a small device. This is an improvised explosive. It can be made from materials you can find in any industrial facility. It will not destroy a tank, but it will destroy a fuel line, a communication relay, a transport vehicle. Small things. But small things add up. Over the following months, Maria's resistance fighters conducted over 200 operations. They blew up bridges. They poisoned water supplies. They spread false information that sent Vectri patrols into ambushes. They made the occupation of Gathax IV cost the enemy more than it was worth. The Vectri commander on Gathax IV requested reinforcements 4 times. Each time, he was told that none were available because forces were needed elsewhere. Human-trained resistance movements were springing up on dozens of occupied worlds. The Vectri had expected the conquered populations to submit quietly. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that had no uniforms, no bases, and no fear. Back on New Geneva, General Marcus Webb reviewed the latest intelligence reports. The news was better than it had been in months. The Vicari advance has stopped, reported his intelligence officer, Commander Alina Cross. They are consolidating their gains instead of pushing forward. Our analysts believe they are confused. They do not understand why we are fighting this hard. Marcus nodded. They have conquered species before. They expected us to be the same. What do we do now, General? Marcus looked at the map at the line that marked the boundary between occupied space and free space. On one side, billions of beings lived under Vectri rule. On the other side, the combined fleets of the Alliance waited, growing stronger every day. Now, Marcus said, we start pushing back. He began issuing orders. Fleets moved into position. Supply lines were secured. Training programs expanded. For the first time since the war began, the galaxy was not just surviving. It was preparing to fight. The Vecturi had awakened something they did not understand. They had poked a species that had spent its entire existence learning how to destroy itself. And now that species had turned its terrible talents outward. The war was about to enter a new phase, and humanity was ready to show the galaxy what it was truly capable of. 7 years of war had left scars across the galaxy that would take centuries to heal. Worlds that had once been paradise were now ash and ruin. Species that had counted their populations in billions now struggled to survive in refugee camps. The great civilizations that had built the Galactic Council were broken, humbled, and desperate. But humanity had not broken. Humanity had bent, bled, and suffered more than any species in the Alliance. But it had not broken. Admiral Christopher Lane stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Defiance, watching the enemy homeworld grow larger in the viewport. He was 58 years old, though he looked much older. His hair had gone completely white during the war. His left eye was artificial, a replacement for the one he had lost at the Battle of Kesari Prime. His hands trembled slightly, a side effect of the nerve damage he had received during the siege of Althean Station. The Defiance had been rebuilt 3 times. Half of its original crew was dead, replaced by veterans from destroyed ships who had nowhere else to go. The vessel itself was a patchwork of human engineering and salvage technology from 6 different species. Held together by determination and desperate ingenuity, behind the Defiance, the largest fleet ever assembled in galactic history spread across the void, 3,000 warships from every species in the Alliance, all of them battered, all of them scarred, all of them ready to end this war. "Admiral," said Commander Rachel Torres from the tactical station, "the Vecturi defensive fleet is moving to intercept. They have approximately 800 vessels." Christopher nodded. The numbers were in their favor for once. But he knew better than to assume that meant victory would be easy. "All ships," he broadcast on the fleet-wide channel, "this is Admiral Lane. We have come too far to stop now. Today we end this. Not for glory, not for revenge. For everyone they would have enslaved if we had not stood in their way." He paused, looking out at the stars. Somewhere among them were the graves of friends he had lost. Ships that had burned. Crews that had died screaming, "We fight for them too," he continued. "For everyone who gave their lives so we could be here today. Do not waste their sacrifice. Do what needs to be done. And when this is over, we go home." Cut the channel and turn to his command staff. "Begin the attack." The battle lasted 18 hours. The Vecturi fought with the desperation of a cornered predator, knowing that defeat meant the end of everything they had built. Their ships threw themselves at the Allied fleet in waves, seeking to overwhelm through sheer ferocity. But humanity had learned desperation long ago. On battlefields called Stalingrad and Gettysburg and Verdun, they knew what it meant to fight when there was no hope, no retreat, no option but victory or death. Christopher watched the tactical display as ship after ship vanished from both sides. The cruiser Relentless went down fighting, taking 4 Vecturi destroyers with it. The carrier Freedom burned for an hour before its reactors finally gave out. The battleship Guardian held the flank alone for 20 minutes, while the rest of the fleet regrouped. Every loss was a knife in Christopher's heart. But he could not stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. Admiral Rachel reported, her voice strained. "We have broken through the main defensive line. The path to the planet is clear." Christopher looked at the Vecturi homeworld below. It was a harsh world, covered in dark forests and jagged mountains. Somewhere down there was the command center where the Vecturi High Command directed the war. If they could take it, the war would be over. "Launch the ground assault," Christopher ordered. On the surface of the Vecturi homeworld, Major Catherine Price led the assault on the enemy command center. Her unit had started with 500 soldiers. They had lost half of them breaching the outer defenses. Catherine was 46 years old, a former Olympic athlete who had traded medals for military service after the war began. She had led soldiers into battle on 9 different worlds, survived wounds that would have killed most people, never once considered giving up. Today she had been wounded twice. A plasma burn on her left arm that had melted through her armor. A piece of shrapnel in her leg from an explosion that had killed 3 soldiers beside her. The medics had patched her up enough to keep moving, and she had refused anything stronger. "Ma'am, you need real medical attention," said her sergeant, a young man named Tyler Brooks. He was 24, fresh-faced despite everything he had seen. "That leg wound is bad?" "I will rest when they surrender," Catherine replied, limping forward through the smoke and debris. "Keep moving." Command Center was a massive fortress carved into the side of a mountain. The Vectri had built it to withstand orbital bombardment, but they had not expected enemies to reach it on foot. Catherine's soldiers pushed through corridor after corridor, fighting for every meter. The Vectri defenders fought hard. They were not cowards, whatever else could be said about them. They believed in their cause, believed that their species was destined to rule the galaxy. They died for that belief by the hundreds. But belief was not enough against soldiers who had nothing left to lose. Catherine was the first one through the door of the main command chamber. Inside, the Vectri High Commander stood surrounded by his staff, weapons raised for a final stand. For a moment, the two species faced each other across the room. Catherine could see fear in the High Commander's eyes. Real fear, perhaps for the first time in his life. "It is over," she said. "Surrender now, and your people live. Fight, and we will destroy everything." The High Commander hesitated. Behind him, his staff looked at each other uncertainly. "You are just one species," the High Commander said. "How did you defeat us?" "We are stronger. We are older. We had conquered others before you were even born." Catherine met his gaze. "You wanted to know what makes humans different? We do not give up, ever. You can beat us, burn us, destroy everything we have, and we will still get up and keep fighting. Because that is who we are." She raised her weapon. "Now surrender. I will not ask again." The High Commander's weapon clattered to the ground. One by one, his staff followed. At 0342 hours, Earth Standard Time, the Vectri Dominion surrendered unconditionally. The message was broadcast on all frequencies. See by every ship and every world in the galaxy. The war was over, Catherine finally allowed the medics to treat her wounds. She had been awake for 36 hours, running on nothing but adrenaline and stubborn refusal to die. As the painkillers kicked in and the world started to go fuzzy, Tyler sat beside her. "We did it, ma'am," he said quietly. "We actually did it." Catherine looked up at the ceiling of the field hospital, listening to the sounds of soldiers celebrating outside. 7 years of war. Countless lives lost. Worlds destroyed. Civilizations shattered. But they had done it.
"Ow,"
she whispered. "We did." She closed her eyes and, for the first time in years, slept without nightmares. Across the galaxy, the news spread. On refugee camps and occupied worlds, beings who had lived in fear for years learned that their nightmare was ending. On Earth, crowds filled the streets of every city, weeping with relief and joy in the unified command center on New Geneva. General Marcus Webb received the surrender notification. He stared at it for a long moment, then set it down on his desk and put his head in his hands. They had won. At a cost that would haunt him for the rest of his life, they had won. The war was over. Now came the harder part. Building something worth all that sacrifice from the ashes. The great chamber of the Galactic Council had been rebuilt, but it was not the same. The living crystal walls had been repaired with ordinary stone where the originals could not be salvaged. Many platforms stood empty, their species extinct, or reduced to scattered survivors. The golden light that had once filled the space was dimmer now, as if the building itself remembered what had been lost. Ambassador Linda Morrison stood at the center of the chamber for the third time in her life. Her hair was completely gray now, and lines of exhaustion marked her face. She had aged 20 years in the 7 since the war began. But her eyes were still sharp, her voice was still strong. Behind her stood Admiral Patricia Dunn, General Marcus Webb, and the surviving commanders who had bled for the Council's survival. They wore their dress uniforms, decorated with medals from a dozen species, but their faces showed no pride, only weariness and grief, and the weight of everything they had seen. The Council members watched in silence. The Altheans, reduced to a fraction of their former population, floated in their columns of light without the arrogance they had once displayed. The Marathi sat in their pools with heads bowed. The Khazari perched on their crystal branches, their feathers dull with mourning. There were new faces, too. Species humanity had liberated from Vecthory occupation, given seats on the council as full members for the first time. They looked at the human delegation with something close to reverence. Linda let the silence stretch. She had thought carefully about what she would say today. This moment would shape the future of the galaxy for generations to come. 7 years ago, she began, I stood in this chamber and warned you that the Vecthory were preparing for war. You dismissed me. You called my people children. You said we did not understand the complexities of galactic diplomacy. She paused, letting the words sink in. 40 billion sentient beings died in this war. 12 species will never recover from their losses. 3 are gone forever, their histories and cultures erased as if they never existed. The Althean High Speaker, a young female named Sarith, who had replaced Valath after his death in the evacuation of Ethon, flinched visibly. We did not fight this war to prove ourselves superior, Linda continued. We did not fight for territory, or resources, or revenge. We fought because it was right. Because someone had to stand against the darkness, and we refused to let innocent people suffer while we did nothing. She activated a holographic display showing a map of the galaxy. Human ships now patrolled trade routes that had been abandoned during the war. Human colonies provided refuge for displaced populations. Human engineers were rebuilding infrastructure across 100 worlds. Our soldiers died on planets they had never heard of, for species that had mocked them. Our ships burned in systems we had no claim to. Our people gave everything they had, not because you asked, but because that is who we are. Linda stepped forward, her voice hardening. But this is our final message to the Council. We will not warn you again. We will not beg you to listen. From this day forward, humanity will do what humanity has always done. We will protect those who cannot protect themselves, with or without your approval. She gestured to the commanders behind her. These are the men and women who saved the galaxy. Admiral Dunn, who lost 3 fleets and rebuilt them each time. General Webb, who coordinated the largest military operation in history. Major Price, who led the assault that ended the war. They did not do it for glory or gratitude. They did it because they believed that every life has value, even the lives of those who had treated them with contempt. The chamber was utterly silent. We offer you partnership, Linda said, not submission. We offer you friendship, not dominion. We will help you rebuild. We will share our technology, our resources, our knowledge. But we will never again ask permission to do what is right. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every delegate she could. If another threat rises, if another enemy comes to enslave and destroy, do not look to your ancient treaties and your elegant diplomacy. Look to us, because we warned you once, and we will not do so again. Next time, we will simply act. She turned and began to walk toward the exit. Behind her, Admiral Dunn and the other commanders fell into step. Ambassador Morrison called High Speaker Shrut. Linda stopped, but did not turn around. The Althean people wished to formally apologize. For how we treated humanity before the war, we were wrong. We were arrogant, and we paid a terrible price for our arrogance. Sareth's voice trembled. We owe you everything. How can we ever repay such a debt? Linda finally turned. Her expression softened slightly. You can repay it by being better. By listening when others warn you of danger. By treating every species, no matter how young or how different, with the respect they deserve. She paused. And by remembering, always, that peace is not something that happens by itself. It must be defended. It must be fought for. It must be earned. She walked out of the chamber without another word. The council voted unanimously to grant humanity a permanent seat on the Executive Council. 3 elder races formally apologized for their dismissal of human concerns. The Marathi offered to name their rebuilt homeworld after a human soldier who had died defending their people. The Khazari created a new holiday, honoring the alliance between their species and humanity. But Linda Morrison did not attend the ceremonies. She returned to Earth, to a small house overlooking a quiet lake in Vermont, where her wife, Catherine, had been waiting for 7 years. Catherine was standing on the porch when Linda arrived. She was older too. Her red hair faded to gray, but her smile was the same as it had been when they first met 30 years ago. Catherine asked. Linda climbed the steps slowly, feeling every one of her 60 years. It is over. Really over this time. Catherine handed her a cup of coffee. In the council? They apologized. They want to make us partners, equals, leaders. Linda sank into her chair with a sigh. Everything we wanted before the war, they are giving us now. Does it feel like a victory? Linda was quiet for a long moment, watching the light play on the surface of the lake. Somewhere out there, billions of beings were rebuilding their lives. Soldiers were coming home. Families were reuniting. The galaxy was healing. No, she said finally. It feels like the end of a very long nightmare. Victory would have been preventing the war in the first place. Catherine sat beside her and took her hand. You saved them. All of them. Even the ones who did not deserve saving. That is what humans do. We save people. Even when they do not listen. Even when they treat us badly. Even when it costs us everything. Linda smiled sadly. I just wish we did not have to lose so many good people to prove it. Across the galaxy, monuments were being built to human soldiers who had given their lives for species that once mocked them. The largest stood on Sirith Prime, where Sergeant Danny Reeves had made his final stand, holding a bridge against an armored column until evacuation ships could escape. He had died surrounded by enemy bodies, his rifle still clutched in his hands. The inscription on his monument read simply, "They warned us. Then they saved us." In the great libraries of the elder races, scholars began a new chapter in galactic history. They called it the Age of Humanity, and they wrote of a young species that had risen from a small blue world to become the guardians of the galaxy. They wrote of warning, ignored, and sacrifice, freely given. They wrote of soldiers who died for strangers and commanders who refused to leave anyone behind. They wrote of a species that had spent its history fighting itself, and then turned that terrible talent toward protecting others. And in the final passage of every history, they wrote the same words. When the darkness came, humanity stood in the fire, and they did not fall. On Earth, life slowly returned to normal. The soldiers came home. The shipyards fell silent. The war memorials grew crowded with visitors who came to remember those who had not returned.